What's up, folks? Welcome back to the channel. So I know I said that we were going to do third person simple camera and first person simple camera tutorial for this one that we're doing now, but I figured getting the character moving first would be more beneficial, because even if we set up the cameras, we won't be able to move the player to see those cameras in action really. So I figured we would do the input movement first, and then the cherry on top would be the adding the simple cameras, and we'll have you guys well on your way to getting movement situated. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So in the previous video, we left off with setting up the input bindings and then getting our character set up as a child entity of our player parent. So over here we have mesh, of course, with the skin mesh, and then player, we just have our transform. So we want to use the player entity, the parent, as the host for all of our Lua scripts and physics and things of that nature. And then if you wanted to apply specific things to certain parts of our certain child entities, then you can do that as well. So for the player, what we want to do is go to add component. We want to go up to input under gameplay, and we want to hit the three dots, browse, and find the whatever you named it. I named mine main, the input bindings we made in the previous video. That's going to connect us to our events that we created. Now, as a side note, we're not going to dive too much into it now, but it's always good measure to add your physics entity, or sorry, physics component to your entity. So since we're using characters, we simply want to add the character physics. So to give you an idea, if we actually remove that and I click on the player and I wanted to, move him upward without the physics, if you go in game, he's not bound to the law of physics. So no gravity, no mass, no inertia, none of that. So if I add the character physics, I like using capsule, just used to using capsule coming from Unity and even Unreal. If I go into game now, just by adding that component, he is now bound by gravity. Now you can input your own custom gravity if you want to bound him by what we are affected by in the real world, which is 9.8 meters per second. You can do that, and you can code your game around that if you're like building a physics-based game. So it's pretty thorough, pretty cool components and things like that. We won't get too much into it now. Besides, as much as I love physics and science, I am very rusty in that department. So let's pick it back up where we were, add our character physics, and now we want to, let me close this out and close that for now. Go to add component, and let's add a Lua script. Okay, and we want to open the editor. And now that that's open, let's go to file, new. We want to, wherever your project is, or if you're like me using the samples project, let's open that. Project C Studios, code, and I'm going to call this movement. All right, let's save that. Now, if you guys know from my previous tutorials, or if you've been playing with Engine at all, we got to set up our table, our basic table, and then our basic functions, and we go from there. So let me go ahead and set that up. Pause your video if you are need to set it up yourself, because I'm going to speed through it. I'm actually going to just type it out just in case this is your first video from my channel. All right, that is our basic script. So if you want to pause the video and write that down, you can. If you already have it, great. If this is your first video seeing me work in Lua, check back some of my older tutorials, more specifically the intro to Lua for Lumberyard that I made a few weeks ago. That will get you started with getting used to this setup. But if not, you just want to start from here, go ahead and pause the video again and write it out. But this is our basic setup. We have our table here where we store our properties and things of that nature. And then we have our basic functions, which is on activate, which is called when the entity is activated, or whatever the script that this is on is activated. And then deactivate, so when we're not using the entity, if it's destroyed or if we want to disconnect from a lot of the e-buses, then we'll put that code inside of here. So what we want to do, for one, I want to add a property just for the future, and I want to call it movement speed, and we want to set that to 0.03. Yeah, so go ahead and do that. Don't set it to anything really high, like even 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all that is too much. Set it to a decent value, play around with the values and see what kind of speed you like. I found 0.3 to be really nice in the pocket for movement, but you can tailor it to your liking. What we want to do now is, inside of on activate, we want to set up some variables. If you're coming from 1.7 or 1.8 and you had a glance at the chicken component entity that was set up in there, and you saw like some of the code that was used to make the chicken just move left and right in animation, it was a lot, and even a lot of different scripts for on, held, and things of that nature. They simplified it a lot, and even now it still was around 40 lines of code for when I was practicing. And to compare it, for an engine like Unity, it's usually like 8 to 10 lines of code, and if you don't count spaces, it's more like 5 to 6. So I know they said that they were actually revamping the input system again, so it's going to be even more simpler. So they're putting the work in to make things easier and comparable to what other bigger engines are doing. So that's great. So let's go ahead and get this set. We want to first set up our input notification IDs so we can dynamically call them or change them in the future, because like I said, you don't want to hard code pretty much anything in your code. You want to get away from that. So let's set up a few variables. So I'm going to do self dot let's call it forward ID, and we want to equal that to input event notification ID, and we called it what, forward, right? Yeah, forward. Yeah. So what this is doing is it's taking the variable that you declared the variable to forward ID or whatever you want to use, and we're going to equal input event notification ID that we set up in the event editor to that variable. So now this is equal to this. So when we call this anywhere in our code, it's going to be relative to this. It's going to be calling this this line of code. So to complete that, we want to actually connect to the input event notification bus and actually really tie it to the event that we set up in the editor. So let's set that to a variable so the garbage collection does not destroy it when we're testing it in game. So we want to set this to, let's just say forward bus. Yeah, forward bus, and we're going to equal that to input event notification bus dot connect, and we want to connect this to self, and we want this to equal self dot forward ID. Okay, so what this is doing is it's setting another variable called forward bus, and we're appending that to the connection of the notification bus, and we're tying our variable that we set to the ID, because the arguments for this bus is the entity ID and the notification ID, so which is what this is. So since we set that to this variable, we're going to use this variable as the ID argument for the notification bus. Got it? So we're going to do that 3 more times for backward, left, and right. So I'm going to complete that. You guys go ahead and pause the video, do the same thing. We're going to come back, and when I come back, we're going to have all 4 events set to a variable, so we can then manipulate it with different callbacks for movement and things of that nature. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, guys, so you should have something similar or the same if you're following me directly as what I have here. So we just copied what we did for the first 2 lines of code. So we have self.backwards ID, same as self.forward ID. Same lines for the notification ID. We just changed the name to backward, left, and right. And then we made sure the ID variable that we set for the first line of code is equal to the ID set when we're connecting to the notification bus. So if you notice, all 4 variables are also the same variables that are set for the notification bus ID here. Cool? Right, so now we're ready to implement the code. So the eBus that we're going to first attack is the input notification bus, because that holds the callbacks that we need for things like on held, on press, on released, which is basically pressing, releasing, and holding inputs for like the controller, any kind of joystick or the keyboard or the mouse or whatever. So if we go to the input notification bus, go to notifications, and here you'll see on held, on press, and on released. Right now we're just going to use on held, and I guess when I give you guys how to use that or how to code that, you have a better idea how to use on press and on release, because it'll be the same thing because you already know what that is. All right, so one thing before I do that, inside of on deactivate, we want to deactivate from the input bus. I don't want to forget that when we're not using it. So let's do self dot input event notification notification bus dot disconnect. Cool. Now that's set. Get that out the way. We want to give us some space here, because I usually like the on deactivate at the bottom of my scripts. I mean, I haven't written any really long scripts in Lua yet, but I keep it at the bottom because it's going to be the least used, so to speak. So we want to create a function. We want to use move, and then we want to hit on held, and let's just give this a float value. And real quick, shout out to Bill Merrill from the Amazon engineering team. I had a small conversation with him on Twitter, and he was helping me out with the input system, because I was following the tutorial, and the way they laid it out in the tutorial, which was probably from a previous version of the input event system, it left little room to or at least for me to think in that way, because I'm still new to Lua, so it didn't even click in my head to even think about doing it the way Bill showed me. But they had a totally different way in the tutorial, so if you followed that, I'm going to show you a simpler way. Hopefully you already see that. But on held, we're going to use that to simulate holding forward, backward, left, and right, and when we call those events, we are going to get visual action inside of the game. But yeah, big shout out to Bill Merrill, who helped me out with this code. He simplified it for me, and now I'm going to share it with you guys. So let's end that. Open that up, and what we're going to use if then statements. So it will count against, or check against rather, the events that we're looking for, the ID that we're looking for against what is actually being pressed. If it's that event that we're calling that is being pressed, then it's going to do something. So those are if then statements. A lot of you should be familiar with them, whether you're coming from visual scripting or traditional text-based scripting. So in Lua, it's if then. They also have else and else if, but you have to include the then. So we have if input event notification bus is already there. Dot get current bus ID. And now we're going to use something different that if you're new to Lua or programming in general, you're not going to know what it is. So we're going to use two equal signs. Now the difference here is for the variable here, we're actually telling on the left of the equal sign, we're setting a variable and we're telling what's on the right to equal that variable. So we're telling this to equal this, or vice versa. We're telling this to equal this. When you're using two equal signs, you're comparing. It's a comparative operator. So it's saying that is this the same as whatever else is on this side. So we're going to use self, and this is where the variable comes in. Self dot forward ID. So now we're asking, is the current ID equal to forward? Because remember, we set forward to this ID, so to this variable. So we're just calling that variable because it's holding this input ID, right? So we're saying if the current ID is equal to our forward event, let's close it off. Now we want to hit then, so we want to put then here. So if the current ID is equal to our forward ID, then we want to do something. And let's put our end here. Go up, and we want to use the transform bus, right? So let's go to the transform bus. Now I kind of memorize a lot of the transform bus events because, for one, I'm familiar with a lot of them, and it's pretty simple compared to some of the other e-bus events. So we want to use move entity. We can also use the physics components request bus and use add impulse, and I'll show you guys that a little later. But we want to use transform bus dot event dot move entity, right? Yeah, and it has two arguments, which is the entity ID. So that's self dot entity ID, and it's asking for vector 3. So vector 3 point in space, those X, Y, and Z gives you a position in the game engine world space, and we can use that to propel the player forward, backwards, up, down, left, right, things of that nature using a vector 3. So we're gonna go vector 3. We're gonna, since we're not gonna use anything in the X axis, so we're gonna use 0, because the way it's constructed for vector 3 is what you'll usually see is vector 3, and then in open and closing brackets you will have 0, comma 0, comma 0, and then it'll be closed off. That is pretty much 0 origin for your vector 3. In Unity you might use vector 3.0, or you might use the same layout here. So what we're gonna do is take the Y, which is this value here, which is our forward vector, which is the forward where we want to move. So we're going to set this. Remember, we set the movement speed up here, right? So we want to do self dot properties dot movement speed. Oh, sorry, I spelled that wrong. Well, I capitalized wrong, sorry. Movement speed. So this is telling the engine to move the entity 0.03 while we're holding down the forward event, 0.03 units or whatever the measurement is for Lumberyard, I guess per frame. So it's while you're holding it, it's moving it forward. So let's go ahead and save that. Make sure I'm not missing anything. For good measure, let me put my semicolon and actually put them all of them, just because it's a habit, and since it doesn't matter whether you do it or not, I'm just gonna add it. I think we're good to go. So let's go ahead and check it inside of the editor and see if we have forward movement. Oh, before we go, yes, I always forget this, so let me check. No matter how long I've been programming, I always forget to add another closing bracket, because if you see here, we have an opening bracket on the left side when we're calling the arguments for move entity. But since we're using the vector 3, we have to do another set of opening and closing brackets, which is right here. So that means on this side, we need one for the vector 3 and one for the move entity. So if you have your cursor next to it, you can see it turn blue, and the corresponding bracket also turns blue. If I put it on this one and that one turns yellow, this one turns blue, this one turns blue. So make sure you do that. I always forget that. It's a common mistake, and this is the reason why I love autocomplete, because I don't miss little things like this. But it's probably why it's a clutch, because it's probably why I do forget, because I'm depending on it so much. But when we have that, so make sure you have it saved. Let's open the editor, and if we hit game, we should get forward movement. And there we go, we have forward movement. Now, of course, none of the other ones work, so, but that's good. We have forward movement. So let's go back into the Lua editor, and what you want to do is repeat your steps. Now, I'm not a fan of copy and paste. I believe in writing it out, because it sticks to you more that way. But since, and hopefully you did, since you wrote out this first one, you can now just copy and paste it 3 more times, and then just replace different values that correspond with backwards, left, and right. If you want to type the whole thing out, more power to you. That's how I would do it, but you don't have to, since you typed it out now. You kind of know what you're doing. So what we want to do here is copy. For just because it's for yeah, let's indent these, because it doesn't do it for you automatically. I wish it did, but it doesn't. Let's do that. And of course, that's not going to look right. So copy that one more time. All right, now we have those events. So I'm going to change out the variables and values so it matches up with the other 3. You pause the video, you do the exact same thing. Gonna come back, and we're gonna top off the tutorial and make sure everything is working the way we want it to before we close out the video. So pause the video and get that done. All right, guys. Now that you guys should be done setting up your 4 events now. I was gonna do something off screen, but I want to show you guys just so you don't be confused, especially if you're just now working with like vector 3s or just Lua code in general. So forward and backwards is your positive and negative values of a number. So 0 would be your idle animation. Let's just go from there. 0 will be your idle animation. Anything above 0, whether it be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, is going to make you move forward, and of course make you animate. Anything that's below 0, negative 0.0, 0.2, 0.3, 1, negative 1, negative 2, so and so, is going to be your backwards movement and your backwards animation. Same thing goes for left and right. Right is your positive, left is your negative. So easy way to do that in code is just to put a minus sign that tells the engine that we want to move the opposite version of what we set this, and it goes based off your variable. So since we set the movement speed to be positive 0.03, if we put a minus sign, since right here we're on the backwards ID, so we want to move backwards, if we put a minus sign here, it's going to move us backwards instead of forward, which is what this one does. So what we want to do for left and right, we want to actually copy this, cut it, put a 0 here because we no longer want to move in the y-axis when it comes to left and right. We want to move in the x-axis, which is the very first number in your vector 3. So let's do that, and let's paste it here. So now we have the movement speed, the same speed, moving in a positive manner in the x-axis. So you should guess it by now that the same thing for the left variable, it's the same thing for the previous one, and we're just adding a minus sign. So let's paste that, and let's add a minus sign there. So let's make those few changes if you haven't already to simulate left and right, forward and back. Save that. Make sure you save it. Let's go back to the editor. Let's hit game. And if we hit forward, let's hit back. Let's hit right. Let's hit left. Or sorry, right, left. I think I confused that in the engine. I think I did. But you see, we have movement. We have movement. Left, forward, back. Look at that, guys. We have movement in the engine. Look at that. So sexy. So sexy. All right. I think I confused my left and right movements. Left. Yeah, I did. So I wasn't even looking at my IDs. I just was going based off what I thought I was saying. So left is negative, and right, which is right, my right ID was right here. We want that positive. Let me save that. So now when I go in, sorry, not unfreeze. When I go in, D should make me go right. Yep, and then A should make me go left, forward, backwards. Cool, cool. So I hope you guys learned a good deal about inputs, and hopefully it could make you further, or can further your education with the engine and getting things up and running, getting your characters moving and things of that nature. The caveat to that is I'm still working on things like handling rotation via the mouse. It's a little bit different from what I'm used to with other engines, so have to fiddle around with it because, as you know, we don't have documentation, and rightly so, because just in the last 2 versions this input system has changed, and they're working on a newer version to make it simpler, as I said before, for us for the next time around. So if they spent like a week on documentation only to be changed in 2 days, they just lost a week. So I get it. Well, that's my theory anyway, but if that is true, I get it. You know, I get why they're not trying to spend too much time on it, because the engine is in a constant state of flux. So we just gotta deal with it and trust the team at Amazon, because they are doing a great job. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. Comment below. Let me know if you are enjoying the series, if you're enjoying the tutorials. Let me know if you have any ideas what you want to see. And I will definitely check them out and see if they're viable to do, and most of the time they are, and most of the time I will do them. So I hope I have been a help to you guys. We have one more video which is going to be really simple, and that's, you know, getting the camera options for first player and third player simple, very, very simple working. And yeah, and then we'll have another little series which we got character movement. So we're slow and steady building up small systems, guys, and I hope you guys are enjoying it. So I will catch you guys later. Catch you guys in the next video, and always remember, guys, to keep developing.